you wanted the best, you've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. For 16 years and over 2,000 episodes, we've been bringing you the Chris Voss Show. We just turned the big 16 in August. I think it's August 19th officially when it happens. 2024. What can you do? It's surprising we've been around this long, but help us out. For the show to your family, friends, and relatives, go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss One, the TikTokity, and all those crazy places on the internet. As always, we have the most prolific and amazing authors on the show that come to us from all the great publishing houses. We have another one today. Edgar Doleman joins us on the show. He's written multiple books, and his latest has been reissued. It's called Arlen's Gun, a novel of war in Vietnam, a journey from alienation to brotherhood. Came out January 18th, 2023. And we'll be talking to him about his book, his insights, his experience, and what got him into writing and made him such a great writer. He is a child of a career soldier. He grew up in 2 countries and 8 states. On graduating from college, he followed his father into the Army, serving in Europe, Korea, Vietnam, and various posts in the U.S. After retiring from the Army, he began a second career in information technology, and on retiring from that, he and his wife Donna retired to the Northern Neck, where she encouraged his writing and conceived the initial idea for a mystery, the Chimera. But the project was put on hold as she fought an ultimately losing battle with cancer. Finding it too painful to continue with the Chimera, he focused on his work, and some years later, Arlen's Gun, a novel war in Vietnam, came out. And he's since returned to the Chimera, which is now his second novel, expanded into a series. Welcome to the show, Edgar. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Awesome sauce. It's wonderful to have you. Congratulations on the books. Give us .coms or wherever you want people to find you on the interwebs, please.
There's edgardoleman.com.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it. That's my website for books.
There you go. And how many books do you have, by the way?
There's 3 that have been published, technically 4.
Mm-hmm.
And a 4th one, or a 5th one in that case, is coming out shortly.
There you go. So give us a 30,000 overview of your book, Arlen's Gun.
Okay, I tended to write mainly to try to understand a question I had to myself. And a lot of that was just writing short stories. And so the initial impulse for what became Arlen's Gun was almost like a memoir of, okay, what did I learn, do, and experience in Vietnam? Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me as I started that it was really too kind of egocentric. And it's not what I really took away from Vietnam. What most stuck with me was the soldiers themselves. Mm-hmm. So it seemed to fit better into a novel. And part of what also stuck with me was an experience before Vietnam, when I had a basic training company. That's where draftees and volunteers first put on a uniform and start learning how to be soldiers. Mm-hmm. And you run into kids who come from really lousy backgrounds and some with good backgrounds and some who are just normal. But the kids from really bad backgrounds and bad attitudes and so forth were the most challenging, but in a way to me the most important, because if they in effect flunked out of the Army, they were probably toast for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. And so I would see the transformations take place as they basically grew out of their angers and alienations and things like that and became part of a team. And that tended to reinforce the notion, or the experience, you might say, of how men acted and reacted and worked together in Vietnam, in the dirty, grungiest edge of warfare, went directly in the jungle.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sort of two things that came out to me, and neither one of which was really courage. The most important one was, to me, compassion.
Oh.
The first level of compassion was learning to worry about the guy next to you,
Mm-hmm.
and to back him up, and to know that he's going to back you up. And the second part is to worry about him, that guy next to you and the guy behind you and so on, because you wanted him to come through it just as much as you wanted yourself to come through it.
Yeah.
So it was that kind of team bonding on the one side, and the other side, compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I really realized is that compassion was much more innate, because even when you watch soldiers dealing with enemy prisoners or enemy wounded and whatnot, that compassion would come out. The adrenaline would ebb away, and the fighting spirit, so to speak. And then they start worrying about this guy's health, getting him well, getting him fed, things like that. And it was just kind of natural. And that sort of struck me as very unique in a way, because the enemy was certainly not that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they definitely weren't.
And it almost made you feel sorry for the enemy, because he wasn't that way.
Mm-hmm.
So the novel took a lot of that experience and put it in a novel form, and a lot of the characters were drawn directly from characters I knew, both soldiers I knew and junior officers and whatnot that I knew in my Vietnam experience.
There you go. And in the title, you referenced the Brotherhood. I know that's what a lot of military folks that I interview on the show, and of course I have as friends, they talk about that brotherhood that, they almost lose, they kind of lose when they come back to the States, because they don't really, in the field you have, your buddy's got your back, and having that brotherhood of men, where everybody carries everybody, not really carries everybody, but you know what I mean? And so it sounds like that was kind of the influence of that compassion thing in the Brotherhood, maybe.
I think it's a key component to that. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of veterans, I think it's somewhat more difficult in Vietnam because the tours were just 1 year. Mm-hmm. And if you were, say, a Korean War veteran, the tour was considerably longer. And if you're a World War II veteran, it was until the war ends. Mm-hmm. And so they had a lot more time together in a way. In World War II, in many ways, they didn't have that much more time together because they had such much higher casualty rates. Mm-hmm. So there was always new guys on the block. And in Vietnam, there was that business. You get the new guy on the block, they come in, they're sort of dumped in your lap. And now they have to, they're a bunch of strangers and mixed in with people who know each other. Mm-hmm. And then a week later, they're off on patrol together. And then you're wondering, what about this new guy? What's he like?
Yes,
and the new guy's wondering, geez, I feel all alone. Mm-hmm. And again, that capacity for compassion helped bridge that gap much faster.
There you go. And so in your novel, you basically talk about some of these personalities. Tell us about your main character.
The main character is Arlen, and he actually is an airman, not in the Army. And he and a friend of his, he grew up in lousy circumstances on the wrong streets of Baltimore. Mm-hmm. But his friend convinces him to enlist in the Air Force with him. And that way they'll avoid the draft and they won't get sent to the jungle. And he does. But his buddy ends up in an administrative job, and he ends up as a crewman on an Air Force gunship. Mm-hmm. But his buddy has a much more stabler personality and whatnot, and that's probably why he ended up in a nice job. And Arlen doesn't even get along with the other members of the crew because he's just a loner. He's got a chip on his shoulder for life and so on. But the one thing he does like are the powerful machine guns that the gunship is equipped with. He's enamored with them, and he has very juvenile fantasies about them. And as I mentioned, he doesn't get along well with the other crew members and is slow and kind of surly. But then that gunship is shot down. And they crash land successfully in no man's land. And it's crappy weather, monsoon season, and rescue helicopters can't get to them.
Oh, wow.
So a small Army engineer unit is the nearest ground unit that's available, and they get ordered to go rescue them. And they're a kind of a motley crew because they're on a road clearing mission. So they've got some attached units like combat engineer vehicle, and a road grader and mine detectors and some infantrymen to provide security. And they make the trip to the next valley where this plane crashed and manage to rescue them. But in the process, suffer some losses, including most of their firepower, 2 armored vehicles.
Oh, wow.
But they do rescue the crew, one of whom is seriously wounded. Excuse me. And Arlen conceives the notion that we ought to rescue the machine guns from the gunship. So they do that and manage to get back, manage to get a helicopter. And this is one of the examples from sort of real life. In the book, the helicopter medical evacuation helicopter unit says, no, the weather's too bad. The weather's too bad. And then another voice comes on the line, and it turns out it's the commander of the unit. And he says, where the hell are you? And they tell him, it says, can you get to this road junction? Yes, you can. I said, okay, I'm heading up there. I'll be at an altitude of about 50 feet. And he makes it there, and they rescue the crew, except for Arlen and the other gunner. And what sort of traps Arlen is the other gunner is a really nice kid. He says, we ought to stay with these people because we know how to operate these miniguns and they don't. And at first Arlen is really angry because he doesn't want to do that. And then he suddenly thinks, if I go back on the helicopter, I'll miss out on the miniguns. And he keeps having this fantasy of sneaking one. So they end up sort of stranded because of other events with this unit. And the bulk of the book is how he ends up relating to these small group of infantrymen and small group of engineers and whatnot, and their very primitive encampment and the work they have to do. And then they come under enemy attack because the enemy's launching a major offensive. And the transformation that takes place is his kind of like a lot of the kids in that basic training unit.
Kind of coming of age, if you will.
It's a kind of coming of age and a kind of realization that my survival depends on these guys, these strangers, these people in dirty green suits.
There you go. And on it goes from there, right?
Yeah, but then at the same time, he begins to realize that because he is the gunner on this powerful machine gun, and they've lost their heavy weapons, that he becomes really a key to their survival in these intense battles that start coming up.
Oh, wow.
That's the transformation. He's from alienation to brotherhood on his case, but he's also, in effect, the savior of the group.
Wow. There you go. You go from being the newbie to being the guy who helps save everyone. This should be an interesting story as it develops out. When did you know you kind of had a knack for writing? When did you first start writing? Tell us a little about your experience growing up, and maybe you started writing early on and just didn't get around to publishing.
I did sort of start writing early on. Like I mentioned earlier, I would sort of write to try to understand something. And it might be just, why does so-and-so think that way? Why is so-and-so such a jerk? And then I would write a short story to try to understand the jerk or the other point of view or whatnot. And, they just sort of stacked up. I never tried publishing them. It was my wife who said, you ought to do something with these short stories.
Yeah.
And she started submitting them to contests and whatnot. And I actually would win some. Same with some poetry.
There you go.
And then when I retired, I was, through a friend of hers, I was offered a job to write one of the volumes of Time Life's Vietnam War series. And I had been working on a novel, which was kind of an escape activity. And so I sent them a chapter from the novel and said, if you think that's good writing, then I'll take the job. And so they said, yeah, the writing's great, and we'd like you to write the book. So I wrote one of the volumes of this Time Life series, which was a history work, not fiction. And then went ahead and finished my novel. But about that time, our kids were getting close to college age, and playing starving author wasn't going to really cut it.
That'll do it.
So I got a job in information technology and basically built a career there. And then finally, when we both retired, and she got the idea for a mystery novel set in the area we'd retired in, which is the eastern part of Virginia's Northern Neck, which is very rural and surrounded by water. Beautiful place.
Yeah.
They'll call it God's country.
There you go.
Of course, so do people in Wyoming.
There you go. Everyone
and people in Idaho and so on. So we started the first sort of mystery book, The Chimera, together. And then, as you had noted earlier, she came down with cancer.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
And I would probably be a rich author now if she had survived, because she was a brilliant marketer. And I'm not. So after she passed, I escaped into Arlen's gun, basically. And then got back to the Chimera and realized I could perhaps make it a series.
There you go. You've done it, and now it's out. I'm sure she'd be proud of you. Now you can share it with all the wonderful people, and people can get into it. Did you feel that you went back to the Arlen's gun because you kind of tapped into that brotherhood, that kind of what you really know from your experience in war?
In a way, I don't know. That feels like part of it, and part of it was probably just trying to escape from grief.
There you go. Yeah. It's interesting how sometimes the toughest things that we go through in life sometimes help shape us and shape our stories. And sometimes the most beautiful things come out of that grief. Some of the cathartic moments that we have, So it's interesting how that goes. What's the future for any books? Is there any books you're working on now that you anticipate coming out in the next couple of years?
The two mysteries in the series have been published, and there's a third mystery called Broken Chains that should come out pretty soon. And I'm working on a fourth one that has no name at the moment.
There you go. That's the title of it? It has no name?
No. The current title is Book 4.
I wonder if anybody has ever done, I'm sure someone's done a book called This Book Has No Name. I'm sure. If not, someone should get around to it, I guess. I don't know. But Edgar, it's been wonderful to have you on the show. Give us your final thoughts and pitch out for people to pick up the book and .com so they can find you at.
They can find me at edgardoleman.com. And then, of course, they're available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and those places online. The mystery series features what would be called amateur sleuths, or they accidentally get involved in investigating a murder. And since it's a very rural county and a very small sheriff's department, and one of the main characters on the police side is a very young Indian American detective who chose to take a job in a small rural county because he thought that would put him in a position to learn a much broader range of things about being a detective. He's kind of a prominent feature. And then it deals mostly with, part of it is illustrating both, human characteristics and whatnot that are kind of common everywhere, but human characteristics that are common everywhere, good, bad, and indifferent, but in the cultural settings, which are rather varied here in the Northern Neck.
There you go. It should be interesting to see. We're excited to have it for you. Give us your .com one last time as we go out.
EdgarDoleman.com.
There you go. Thanks, Edgar. It's been wonderful to have you on the show.
Okay, thank you very much. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this.
There you go. We'll keep doing it. Go to all the podcasts, hit them up. I don't know if anybody is as cool as ours, but there's certainly some out there. But thank you very much, Edgar, for being on the show.
Okay.
Continued success on what you're up to.
Thank you.
There you go. And thanks for joining us for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, all those crazy places on the internet. Order up the book wherever fine books are sold. It's called Arlen's Gun, a novel of war in Vietnam, a journey from alienation to brotherhood, out January 18th, 2023. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.